Hello and welcome to Writing Adoption, a panel discussion hosted by the Normandale Reading Series at Normandale Community College. We're so excited to see all of you this evening, and we hope that you'll attend more of our virtual events and our in-person events when they begin again in the fall, including the Normandale Writing Festival, which we have planned for next October. At Normandale, we're fortunate to have Heidi Czerwiec as a faculty member in the English department. She'll be moderating this panel of distinguished writers, all hailing from the Twin Cities. I'll introduce you to Heidi and then have her introduce the other panelists. Essayist and poet Heidi Czerwiec is the author of the lyric essay collection Fluid States, selected by Dinty W. Moore as winner of the Pleiades Press 2018 Robert C. Jones Prize for Short Prose, and the poetry collection Conjoining. She writes and teaches in Minneapolis, where she is an editor for Assay, a journal of nonfiction studies. She's the recipient of a 2020 Artist Initiative grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board, which is supporting both the material she'll be reading from tonight and this panel discussion. Let's give Heidi a round of applause. Yay.
Thanks so much, Kris. And big thanks to Normandale for hosting the reading tonight. And I need to say this activity is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. So welcome everybody. And in introducing this event, I wanted to pause for a second and acknowledge kind of several levels of trauma going on here, that we are meeting, even virtually, that we're meeting on Dakota land, that in the past 10 days, we've been grappling with the ongoing grief over George Floyd's murder and the anxiety over what would happen with the verdict, Daunte Wright's funeral after he was murdered by police. And tonight, our speakers are reading and discussing their writing on adoption, a topic that usually focuses on the happy or complete family, adoptive family, but which is a practice that even in the best cases is rooted in rupture. So I want to take a moment to hold space for and honor all of that. My grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board was to support completing my manuscript, My Son's Brother, which is a memoir in linked essays about our family's experience with open adoption, which is a topic that I hadn't seen talked about as much, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And in putting together this reading, which as part of the grant, I had to present my work, but I also was very excited to be able to use the opportunity to get a panel of incredible authors, all in Minnesota, that we're so lucky to have these writers here today that represent the various parties and issues of adoption. So our panelists tonight, besides me, include Sun Young Shin, a Korean-born writer and cultural worker who was raised in the Chicago area. Her work has appeared in Poetry, Bomb Magazine, the 2021 Gwangju Biennial, the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and many other print, digital, video, and public venues. She's the author of 3 poetry collections, Unbearable Splendor, Rough and Savage, and Skirt Full of Black, all with Coffee House Press, and the editor of 3 anthologies of prose, What We Hunger For, Refugee and Immigrant Writers on Food and Family, which is coming out next week. Okay, yeah, very, very soon. A Good Time for the Truth, Race in Minnesota, and Outsiders Within, which the University of Minnesota Press just reissued. And which Shannon Gibney has a piece in as well. And her 4th book of poems, Wet Hex, will be published by Coffee House Press in June 2022. She also has a also a children's book author of bilingual Korean English, Cooper's Lesson, and another co-written book, Where We Come From, due in 2022. And with fellow immigrant poet Sue Huang, she co-directs Poetry Asylum in Minneapolis, where she also does body work and community healing. Shannon Gibney is a writer, educator, activist, and the author of See No Color and Dream Country, young adult novels that won Minnesota Book Awards in 2016 and 2019. Gibney is faculty in English at Minneapolis College, where she teaches writing. A Bush Artist and McKnight Writing Fellow, her new novel, Botched, explores themes of transracial adoption through speculative memoir. She is currently working on editing an anthology of young adult short stories of adoptees by adoptees with Nicole Chung. And Sheila O'Connor, who is the award-winning author of 6 novels, including her most recent genre-bending book for adults, Evidence of V, a novel in fragments, facts, and fictions, which combines flash forms, archival documents, memoir, and historical research to reconstruct the buried history of incarcerated girls. Honors for Evidence of V include the Minnesota Book Award, the Forward Editor's Choice Award, Marshall Project's Best Criminal Justice Books of the Year, as well as others. She is a professor in the creative writing program at Hamline University, where she serves as fiction editor for Waterstone Review. She is also a member of the core faculty at the Converse Low Residency MFA program. So between the 4 of us, we are representing several of the different points of the adoption issue. I'm an adoptive mother. I'll be reading about that through a domestic, in-state open adoption. Sun Young Shin writes about transracial, transnational adoption. Shannon Gibney writes about transracial adoption, and Sheila O'Connor's Evidence of V has both birth mother and adoptee in it from researching her grandmother, who was a birth mother, and then her mother, who was the adoptee. So I'm hoping that tonight's panel will present like many of the different ways of writing about and trying to represent adoption in writing. So I'll be reading first, and I wanted to do that so that I could get out of the way and feature the other writers. I definitely don't mean for that to be construed in any way at all as putting the adoptive mother experience, giving it primacy. That I don't intend that at all. And in fact, my project is a lot about struggling with that role and how open adoption lays that bare. So in writing My Son's Brother, adoption stories that I had read, the narratives often were either from the point of view of the adoptee looking for the family of origin, or a birth mother trying to find an adopted child. And of course, recently, in more recent decades, that's included the expansion of the missing elements of, race or culture that are also ruptured with that. And the central motivator in my collection comes from the title, My Son's Brother, where the 2 big questions of the manuscript are both the choice to adopt in an open adoption and the relationship with the birth mother, but then the choice, which I'll be reading from tonight, about the opportunity to adopt my son's brother when the birth mother became pregnant again, and our subsequent choice not to, and how that's haunted me and how that's opened up our experiences of family even more once we've been in touch with those other parts of the family. So the part I'll be reading tonight is from the title essay, My Son's Brother, which takes place 9 months after my son Wyatt was born and 3 months after his adoption was finalized. My son's brother. That first fall, with its adjustments to our family schedule, especially me returning to work, is difficult, but we start to make sense of it, to make plans for our future. I apply for sabbatical leave to finish a poetry project, my husband for law school. Kinsey, working full-time and working at an associate's degree, keeps up with us through sporadic texts. One night, while clearing up after supper, my phone vibrates with a message from her. So, some unexpected news. I'm pregnant. It's a real shock. I respond with alarm and worry, for which she is grateful. More than anything, she fears being judged, and I try hard not to do that to her. But I admit it, my first reaction is disappointment. One of the outcomes of us adopting Wyatt is another chance for her to stay employed, finish a degree, get control of her life. Then she texts, I'm choosing adoption again after seeing what a gift it was to you. You are the best parents I could have found for my baby. I don't know if I will find anyone like you. A few texts later, it occurs to me that she's hoping for us to offer to take on this child as well. My gut seizes up. Another baby? We didn't plan on a second. If during Kinsey's ultrasound with Wyatt, the images had revealed twins, we would have been equal parts alarmed and delighted, and would have absorbed the news and absorbed the expansion in our plans, but we did not consider siblings. I've nearly made it through the hard first year with the first. I do some quick math and estimate that she'll be due around March or April, meaning 2 babies under the age of a year and a half. My insides curl tighter. I text back something like, wow, this is a lot to deal with. I'm glad adoption was such a good experience for all of us. I hope the right decision will be obvious. Let us know how you are and what you choose. We love you. Then I call my husband into the kitchen, show him my phone, the exchange of messages. Over the next few days, Evan and I huddled together in bed and over coffee and picked at meals, our thoughts running back and forth, hard and fast. We can't take this baby. I barely made it through the last year. I don't know if I can do it again. What about law school? What about the poetry project? We gave away all the baby stuff why it's already outgrown. I bet we could get it back. Where would we even put another baby? I guess the baby would be in our room for a while, but then we'd have to share a room with Wyatt. Now we're imagining logistics, picturing the new baby already in our home, in our lives. But what about our plans? We'll have to put them off by at least a couple years. We don't need to ask how we'll afford another adoption process. We have enough, a sum we've stockpiled in anticipation of losing Evan's salary when he leaves his job for law school. And because she's choosing us outside the negotiations of the agency, it will be treated as an identified adoption, where the adoptive parents know the birth mother, a process more streamlined, fast-tracked, less expensive. Is being in a position to pay a blessing or an obligation? But the cost of another child, that's twice the cost for everything. How would another baby affect the life we want to provide for Wyatt? He wouldn't have as many comforts, but then again, he would have a sibling, his sibling. We never planned on adopting another child. This isn't just another child. This is Wyatt's sibling. If we were the ones who had a surprise pregnancy, a second child we weren't planning on, we'd find a way to absorb it. Does that mean that we have to absorb Kinsey's choices? If we don't, how could we explain to him that we had the chance to adopt his sister or brother, but didn't? But our plans. Mornings, I take care of Wyatt, picture trying to keep up with his rapidly expanding repertoire of activities, but once again, horribly sleep deprived, plus a newborn in tow. I send panicking messages to my guru, another adoptive mother and writer with whom I'd bonded over the previous months. 2 kids under a year and a half. I already feel like I'll never get any writing done ever again. And yet. Tell me I'm not a horrible person if I don't take on this baby. She responds, Heidi, it sounds like your gut is telling you that you and Evan can't do this and feel good about what you can give Wyatt. There's a happy medium between wresting babies away from teenage girls like in the 60s and having a person with lifelong problems fall into your lap as an adult, almost like you adopted Kinsey. You did not adopt Kinsey. You are not responsible for her life. Her answer blissfully absolves me of one part of our dilemma, so I want to believe her. As she points out, our obligation to Kinsey has shifted, as it must, to our obligation to Wyatt. But this obligation includes how our choices will affect him, and I can't be absolved of that. Of course, parents make choices for their children all the time, and we've already started. Will we join a church, be vegetarian? But adoption choices complicate the nature of the family itself. This choice will determine whether or not Wyatt gets the opportunity to grow up with a brother, one related by blood. Are we obligated to? Over the next week, Evan spends a lot of time pacing the back deck, on the phone with his friends. I sit awake in the dark, feeding Wyatt his midnight bottle, wondering how much longer we'll use his bottle warmer, a hand-me-down on its last legs that burns any stray dribbles of formula to fumes of weird chemical caramel. We worry that we can't say no. We worry that we can't say yes. We worry that Kinsey will become too dependent on us, that she'll rely on us as the answer to her emergencies. Most people regard choice as a good thing, but the weight of choosing, of the fear of regret, can become paralyzing. Over that week, Kinsey continues to text us, her hints becoming broader. And here's the hard thing. This choice is really mine. Evan has always rolled with changes, absorbed them, planned around them, moved forward. But since I'm the one who's borne the brunt of childcare, since this will affect me more, Evan defers to me. He's gracious enough to support me, to call my decision ours, but if we're honest, this is my call. So finally, we circle back to our initial reaction. We can't raise this baby, which is a kinder way of admitting, I don't want to. We slide our fingers from that page, unmark that path, never to follow that narrative. We text Kinsey to say gently that we're sure she'll make another set of parents as happy as she's made us. As soon as we send it, we feel relief. As soon as we send it, we feel sad. Kinsey, who had never been particularly regular in her correspondence, becomes non-responsive. About a week before she gives birth, she surfaces, responding to texts again, dropping careless little bombs as though she's corresponded with us all along. It's a boy. She's told us that, right? And oh, hasn't she told us the adoptive parents live in the same town as us? After the birth, she fades in and out, surfacing at times to request a visit, then canceling as the trip approaches. We feel sadness, relief. Guilt, curiosity, self-torture. We are dying to know more about this boy, our son's half-brother. We contact our adoption social worker, the woman who checked on us after Wyatt's placement, who handles all placements for our area. We tell her we want to be in communication with his half-brother's family, offer our contact info, request that they keep in touch. She passes along our info and reports that while the family is willing, they're a bit overwhelmed with a newborn at the moment and with establishing a relationship with Kinsey, who apparently had waited until late in the pregnancy to choose a family, maybe hoping we would change our minds. They ask for space. But over the next few months, every time we're out in public, I look for new babies who resemble Kinsey and Wyatt. In North Dakota, towheads are the norm, so I study the dark-haired infants, search for the characteristic dimples, the softly cleft chin. Around their own adoption day at 6 months, we send congratulations with pictures of Wyatt at that age and a description of his personality, his love of books, pickles, tacos, singing surprisingly in tune at the top of his lungs, hoping the comparison will intrigue them. We have yet to hear from them. I should add in at this point, like, we're very much in touch with them and the boys play together quite often. I had a choice and I said no. And my no continues to disturb me. Whom might I have harmed by my choice? Not us. My drought ends. My book is published. I write a new poetry manuscript. Evan ends his first year of law school at the top of his class and secures a lucrative clerkship. Not the new baby, who no doubt is happily exploring solid foods and solid footing somewhere in my town. Wyatt? What would Wyatt's life have been like with a brother, I wonder? There are days when he tugs on my hand while I'm cooking or displaces the laptop on my lap, desperate for a playmate. When he crawls into our bed and pats our faces to wake us way too early, even on weekends, so we'll come downstairs to keep him company. When my sister-in-law drops the news that next year their daughter is going to have a new little sister. This cousin Bailey is the same age as Wyatt, their love-hate relationship nearly sibling-like in rivalry. Her joy is his jealousy. When Jerry brings her own adopted son Eli over to play and the boys clamber on the furniture, the stairs, laughing and shoving, ignoring boundaries the way brothers do. With a brother of his own, his actual own brother, he would have a baby to cuddle, to practice his nurturing nature on, someone to help and to boss around, a ready-made friend and partner in crime or enemy and scapegoat. And beyond all the usual tropes, someone to share feelings and thoughts about adoption and their birth family that Evan and I can sympathize with, but simply can't understand. It's said you can't choose your family, but that's not true. Ours involved more choice than most. Our son had little say in any of it, but I don't know if or how much this will hurt him. As an adoptive parent, I'm preparing, as much as one can through workshops and role-playing and readings, for the inevitable questions he will ask us. And I've tried to collect information for when he asks about other family, for if he chooses to get in touch, to ask them for answers I can't give him. I'm preparing to deal with his hurt. But Kinsey's hurt is plain. What does it mean that I said no to her? A girl who said yes to us in the biggest, most unimaginably beautiful way possible. I'm grateful for today's model of open adoption, for humane communication to replace the wrenching away of babies from anonymous mothers. But it visits its own hurts. At some point, our love and nurturing of the birth mother is revealed as a sort of performance to gain the agency's approval, to elicit her yes. An illusion exposed by its eventual limits. Open adoptions prolong the contact until new and different disappointments are probable, inevitable. Even under this new system, where it seems the birth mother makes all the choices, pain is still the price paid. Some in the old expected ways, some entirely unanticipated, some in which I've participated. Kinsey had limited choices. Kinsey chose to have her babies. She chose us and we said yes. Then I, said no. I'm not sure what I owe her, but I owe it to Wyatt to own this. Thank you. Our next reader will be Sun Young Shin. If you want to take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heidi. Yeah, I'm thinking about all that. Hi, everyone. It's like we're friends. Half of you are like I talk to every day. I am going to, before I read, I want to say a couple things that I normally don't have time, or people might not, it's like too much. People are not interested. And it involves my checkered romantic life. But I feel so safe with people. Of course. It's not like, it's just private information that just people don't really need to know, but it's relevant. Because my life is so permeated by adoption, and often like just it's really weird. I'm like an adoption magnet and I don't go looking for it, but I'll just say really like try to say it in like a quick stanza. So I'm transnationally adopted from Korea. My older brother is a domestic adoptee from like a town over. It was closed. at the time because it was the 70s, 60s, 70s. He's 3.5 years older than I am. And then I married someone who was a white mixed race, it turns out, who was adopted within a family in Chicago, who was adopted by his birth uncle, his birth mother's brother, but then his birth mother's brother was not allowed to complete the adoption because he was shortly after diagnosed with a terminal brain cancer. So his wife adopted him, but he remained in touch with his birth mother, who placed 2 other children that she had with 2 other fathers. One was placed for adoption, and the other one was she terminated her parental rights because he had severe cerebral palsy because of during birth umbilical cord. And so he became a ward of the state in Illinois and has lived his whole life in a Catholic home for disabled people. And so then we had 2 children. And then also his birth mother wouldn't really tell us who the father of my ex-husband was. And there were some different possibilities, but we just found out last year through DNA, commercial DNA, who that person is. And they're from Pueblo, Mexico. And that person's mother is still alive. So my kids have a new line on their paternal grandfather and great grandmother. Then I got divorced and I got remarried to someone who rejected being adopted at 12. He was born to a family of 12 in St. Paul. Anyway, so most of the kids ended up going into foster care because the parents were unfit they were taken out of the home, and home was condemned. It's actually Charles Schultz's old home in St. Paul, fun fact. And then he went to various different foster homes. I was in foster care too before I came to the United States. And then one woman wanted to adopt him and asked him, "Do you want me to adopt you?" And he said no, and she kicked him out then. And then I got divorced again. and then I, had another relationship who both his parents were adopted. Like both his parents are mixed race Black people from Indianapolis who were adopted by Black families. And then we broke up. And now my current boyfriend, his father abandoned his mother. And so his mother's new husband adopted him. I don't look for these people. I just want to, but there's just something about being a poet that makes your life amazing. And anyway, and then I have a cousin who's a Korean adoptee, who's a little bit younger than me, and she has Crohn's disease. She couldn't have children. She adopted a 2-year-old from Korea. I'm yelling into my, sorry. Okay. I mean, I need to write a book about all this, but I'm going to read a couple short things from my middle book. It's my Jan Brady, because I really want people to buy it because it hasn't sold through its tiny advance yet. And it's like my favorite. And I don't know. I really want people to buy this book for Mother's Day, or Beltane is tomorrow. Really goes with any holiday. Rough and Savage, about Dante's Inferno. It's very cheerful. Okay. This is a little Korean secret, not adoptee poem, but kind of adoptee poem. Oh, I just lost it. You guys know all about my romantic life. All right, so this is a little poem called Available. There were too many women and children for the wind to eat. A cottage industry without the cottage. From underbridge to skyscraper, wayfarers, thank you, Heidi, call us sentimental, but we prefer crow over raven, pigeon to dove. And then this poem is about language acquisition. It's called Acquisition. The portmanteau, mouth wide as its body, to carry the basic written symbols, caught in ghastly tinny teeth of zippers, descent in pockets, conceal and swallow. The language learner, unbuckle, shine mirror, doubling paper, all the day's news, back and now. Then this whole, like every single poem I write, I never use the word adoption. They're all about adoption. I mean, they're all basically about this like mythic family. And then all the poems are about like genealogical disruption in some way, or monstrousness in some way, or abandonment, being lost in some way. And I feel like all of my writing, I really write like spiritually for and to other lost children. So there's celadon is a Korean thing. It has really good celadon. It can do really thin clay. It has really good spring water. And the reason, they told me this at the Celadon Museum in South Korea, that the reason that Koreans drink lukewarm tea is that we have really good spring water. And the reason that Chinese drink really hot tea and have really thick thick porcelain to hold their tea is that they have to boil their water because they don't have as good of water. So that might just be some nationalism, fun fact, like fun, rivalry, but that is a little bit about this celadon. That's a little bit about celadon. So this poem is also short, and then I'm going to read a couple new things. Earth Under Glass, the Celadon Museum. Tell us again, Father, of the boy who dined lonely on the crush of his own footstep. Tell black lake of fire to boil the tea of small bodies. Mother, roast this barley for tea and remind us of the war food and clear spring water. No, children, I must remind you of the last dragonfly born on this mountain and why all children need a second throat for when the first is left behind. Oh, Father, sing again of the hidden rims of the body and how old we are in this time. Children, once again, I ask you to crack this kiln, break this air, crawl into this heated brick box. Dear Mother, dear Father, we see the light passing through these blackened walls. Why won't you quench this, our first and last thirst? I have, by next year I'll have 9 books. I feel like they're all really like Hansel and Gretel, just like you wouldn't know it, but that's, like the archetype. Okay, thanks for putting up with me, you all. I'm gonna read 2 things from, this is my latest project. It's a chapbook and it's called Granted to a Foreign Citizen, and it incorporates a lot of my immigration papers. It's more about my naturalization process, and this is a traditional Korean flag, but the whole booklet is the same size and design colors. What are they called? The pan colors, Pantone colors from my booklet that is given to people who were becoming naturalized US citizens that year. So there's the cover of it. And you can get this from the art gallery. So this is what the cover looks like of my actual booklet. My mom saved all this stuff for her. She is an MVP. Saved it all for me. A welcome to USA citizenship. And it has all this like amazing nationalistic stuff inside it. But I'm going to read 2 things that are about the origins of Korean adoption. And what's important about Korean adoption, other than the fact that I'm Korean adopted, is that all other transnational adoption programs since the 1950s are based on the Korean model, which was supposedly the most ethical model. It was a Christianized model. But now, because of scholarship, especially from adoptees and activism, we know that there was a lot of child trafficking going on. There were baby switching. There was a lot of deception to Korean parents and mothers who were told that the orphanages were temporary, but they weren't. And then by the time they came back, their children were already sent away, and then they would tell them they were sent to a country where they weren't really sent to. And the expose, kind of the historical expose, continues because Korean adoption continues. Even though it's reduced, like the fact that my cousin just adopted from Korea a couple years ago. Only children with disabilities now really are adopted internationally, older children and children with disabilities. So that's another type of ethnic cleansing that my home country continues to engage in. So this piece is an erasure, and it's an erasure of a letter from 1961 by Dr. Viola Bernard to Mrs. Florence Brown, July 12th, 1961. And my poem, all right, so I don't even know how to read it. It's kind of funky, but I'll read the letter and I'll just read it super fast. And then I'll read a little epigraph and then I'll read the poem. Can an adopted child replace a dead child? Thank you for sending me the write-up of the conference of January 11th, 1961 with Dr. Hyman and the others with respect to policy for requests from families seeking an adoptive child after the loss of their own child, ... I agree most heartily with the continued policy of prompt appointments for such couples. I also agree with continuing our policy of postponing any decision to place a child with such a couple until after they have had a period for mourning. However, I do want to add a comment to the reasoning underlying these procedures and policies. In addition to the reasons outlined in the minutes of the conference with Dr. Hyman, with which of course I am in agreement, I do want to emphasize that in my experience, there is an even more frequent and normal psychological contraindication to placement prior to the mourning process. This reason has to do with the fact that the urge to adopt immediately after the loss of one's own child necessitates effort in which the adoptive child is inevitably experienced emotionally as a replacement of the lost child. In fact, this mechanism provides the intensity of the wish to adopt at such a time. From adoptive experience, we know that this replacement effort of one child for another leads to inevitable unhappiness for both the adopted child and the adoptive parents and is therefore contraindicated. If the specific child who has been lost to these parents can be mourned and finally through the process of mourning relinquished, or to put it another way, if and when the parents through the mourning process can accept the fact of the reality of the loss of their child, then the restitutive nature of the adoption can work out psychologically constructively because what is being restituted can have the experience of being parents. And this can be a healthy restitution rather than having the specific child that is adopted perceived and experienced as if it were the dead child. Okay, I'm only going to read this poem, then leave it. Oh God, it's taking forever. Sorry. So the epigraph is from an article on Cotard syndrome by Hans de Bruyn. In its early stages, Cotard syndrome is characterized by a vague feeling of anxiety with a varying time span from weeks to years. This anxious state gradually augments and can result in nihilistic delusions where denial of life or denial of body parts are the prominent features. The patient loses sense of reality. Despite the delusion of being dead, these patients show an increased tendency to automutilation or suicidal behavior. Additional symptoms may include analgesia and mutism. The core symptoms always reflect a preoccupation with guilt, despair, and death. So my redaction is called, Am I Dead or Adopted? After the loss, their own child, a period for mourning process, adoptive child, as a replacement of the lost child leads to inevitable unhappiness for both the adopted child and the adoptive parents. Specific child who has been lost can be mourned and relinquished the mourning process, accept the loss of their child psychologically. The specific child that is adopted, perceived and experienced as if it were the dead child, ... Thank you so much. I'm excited to hear Shannon and Sheila too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanyong. That was amazing. Made me think also of your piece in Unbearable Splendor talking about Ghost too. That was amazing. Sorry. Chills. Our next reader will be Shannon Gibney.
Thanks, y'all. It's just very interesting gathering of perspectives on adoption, different kinds of writing, relative to the practice and also relative to our positionality in the triad. Sun Young and I, Sun Young is my sister in many ways. So we do a lot of different events together. We've been in different books together, and which is a gift. But it's usually, when we talk about adoption, it's usually with other transracial adoptees who are people of color. I rarely do events around adoption with white people, and I never do them with white adopted mothers. So I'm just being, so for a whole variety of reasons that I don't think I am going to get into right now. But, Sun Young had a Facebook post recently about this event where she really talked about how singular it is, to have the opportunity to delve into all these different perspectives at once, and it's not easy, there were so many beautiful moments, Heidi, in your piece, and I really have never heard actually a piece about open adoption, like going through it, right? Like sort of like what it's like for the adoptive parents on that side. So it's very powerful. But also, there are some triggering things for me as well, and then Sheila's work is so interesting to me because it's like the after effects of adoption and child removal, and sort of the work that she's doing around her grandmother, I believe it is, and Evidence of V. And I know she's going to talk about this, so I don't want to steal her thunder and whatnot. But we talk about adoption as if it's like this closed circle, right? One generation, and that's just not the case. It's just not, and anyone who is an adoptee knows that. Yeah. So I'm going to read, my third novel is called Botched. And it is, it's weird. And it has two primary timelines. I am a domestic adoptee. I identify as a mixed Black transracial adoptee. My birth father was African American. My birth mother was white Irish American. I was adopted into a white family in 1975 and grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. But I did my birth search. I did a birth search when I was 19, and being a domestic adoptee, I have a lot of, being a domestic adoptee, I was able to find out information about both of my birth parents. I found out my birth father, unfortunately, had passed when I was 6, but my birth mother was alive and had been looking for me. And so we had a complicated on again, off again relationship from then until her death some years later. So a lot of my friends, I have a lot of friends who are international Korean adoptees specifically, and it's much harder, if not impossible, for them to find out information and make contact with their birth families and their home communities. So with Botched, I'm taking the information that I found through my birth search. I found out, talking to my birth mother, that my name at birth was Erin Powers. And I'm imagining deeply resting in this alternate reality wherein I am Erin Powers. I say the girl I was, the girl I could have been, the girl I never was. Growing up in Utica, New York with my birth mother, Patricia Powers, in 1975. And then the other timeline, primary timeline, because there are some weird other ones, is me, Shannon Gibney, growing up in Ann Arbor, Michigan in 1985. And then it sort of goes forward. So I'm actually going to read a section that I haven't read before. And I'm going to share some pictures. The book also has sort of like what Sun Young shared, documents that I received at different points from the adoption agency. It's my birth mother and my adoptive mother met during my college graduation, and they had this really interesting, intense bond, and they actually corresponded via letters throughout the years, even in the times that I wasn't really even communicating with Patricia, my birth mom. And so my mom, just like Sun Young said, her mom's MVP, my mom's an MVP too. And so she sent me all these letters, some of which I had never even read when I was working on the first draft of Botched. So I've got some of that in there, and also some pictures. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump in. I'm gonna shut this door because my kids are listening to a movie and I don't want that to get in the way. And you'll see when it starts to get weird, the character Shannon, at different points, these two characters, Erin and Shannon, there's a wormhole that sort of connects them to each other, and they kind of see different parts of each other at different points, and even can physically reach in and out. It's kind of creepy. So you'll see a little bit of that as well. Excerpt of a letter from Patricia Powers to Shannon Gibney. November 1994. I am 19. I do believe that you and I are soul, heart, and lovingly, eternally connected. That as long as we continue to risk and embrace honest communication, that will be our resolution. I do want to say that if any of my curt verbalizations hurt you, I am sorry. Our diversity is one of our gifts. We found each other because we both risk and hunger for truth. Certainly our truths will differ. I am just as certain that our differing truths will resolutely continue to unite us. Shannon, I love you. I have loved you since you spoke to me so many years ago when I chose to listen to your yearnings to be in this world. It was actually a scream to me. And she's referring to, she actually was going to get an abortion and went to the clinic. And then she said that she heard me tell her that I wanted to be in the world, I needed to be in the world, and she couldn't go through with it. This is happening for a reason. We are both meant to learn something here. We both are teachers too. According to principles of learning theory, teaching will occur only when the teacher is open to learning. I look forward to your visit. I hope we can go to the bookstore together. One day too, I would love to show you Provincetown. Must be warmer weather. Maybe next summer or following summer. Question: why didn't the witch have any children? Answer: because her husband had crystal balls. I know, a really dumb joke. XOXO, love, Patricia. And this is a photograph from this first visit. In the scene that I'm going to narrate. So I'm 19 here, and Patricia then would be 38. Sorry. And then Patricia with her dog. Oop, can't really see her face. There she is. In 1994. And then this is, the manuscript also contains a little bit of writing that I did at earlier times, sort of processing reunion and all kinds of the layering of the relationships. And I mean, yeah. So this is a piece I wrote when I was 22. Even though it was embarrassing, I feel like, you know, well, I'm just gonna leave it here. Okay, meeting my birth mother. I knock. She opens the door, breathless and shivering in the cold January air. She offers me a small pale hand and says hello. I think this is the woman who gave birth to me, and I do not believe it. Her eyes wander over my skin, my hair. I know she's looking for the part of her in me as she says, I didn't think you'd be so tall. I nod and laugh loudly. She steps aside and I walk through the door, the warmth of the apartment touching the deep cold within me. And so then I'm just going to read a scene from the second timeline, Shannon Gibney, Utica, New York, December 1994. I am 19. And Bobby is my best friend who has come with me to this first meeting with my birth mother. No, turn left, I tell Bobby, frantically peering at the mashed up map in my hands. I think Clifton is off Newberry. Bobby turns the steering wheel of the '89 Toyota Corolla that my parents have let us drive from Ann Arbor all the way out to Utica, a 7.5-hour journey across the US and Canada that will ultimately end at my birth mother, Patricia Power's house. Okay, yeah, I say, pointing ahead. I can see the sign right there. Bobby swats away my arm, blocking her view of the road. She grumbles something under her breath, and I grin. We have been best friends for 13 years now, and although we often laughed as sisters, we can bicker like them too. I see it, she says irritably. She downshifts into second gear, and we rumble up the quiet suburban street. The houses are maybe 60 or 70 years old, sturdy single-family dwellings with small, snow-filled lawns. I have been to New York City to drop my older brother John off at college at Columbia, but I have never ventured to this part of the state before. I can't quite pinpoint how it feels different from the Midwest, but it definitely does. There's a kind of hum underneath everything, an electricity that animates this small working-class town that I don't feel back in Ann Arbor. Bobby is a sophomore at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York, where she is studying environmental science. When I told her I had found out that my birth mom lived in Utica, the first thing she said was, "Oh my God, that's like an hour and a half from Troy. We have to visit." Then she caught herself in her breath. I mean, if you want to, if you decide you want to visit, I'll go with her. I'll go with you. I told her I would think about it. Patricia's house is modest, a 2-story bungalow with a small porch in front. Yellow trim lines the quaint brick exterior. Cute, I say, as Bobby pulls the car up the slightly inclined driveway. She nods in agreement. We have been in the car for more than 2 hours since our last pit stop, and I know that Bobby's long legs are killing her. She practically leaps out of the driver's seat and stretches for a moment on the driveway. I am more taciturn, realizing all at once that we are here. We are here, which means that in just a moment I will gather myself, walk down the concrete pathway to the front door and knock. And the woman on the other side will be the one who gave birth to me and relinquish me shortly thereafter. The woman I have been conversing with weekly on the phone these past 2 months, as well as trading letters with. When Bobby and I had determined that we would in fact make this trip, I realized that we would need money for gas and other incidentals like food. My work-study job at the college would never cover these expenses, so I reluctantly acknowledged that I would need to ask Patricia to cover them if I was going to go. When I did, she did not react well, saying that she would have to think about it, and hung up on me shortly thereafter. Later, she called me back to apologize, saying that she had been taken advantage of many times in her life and was overcautious because of it. But after talking about it with her partner, Josephine, she saw that it was a reasonable request and one that she could grant. I leaned my head against the cool car window, its icy edges calming my increasingly hot skin. I think about my parents back home in Ann Arbor, who were incredibly hurt when I told them about the search, and my brothers, who don't understand why I need to do it at all. If I'm honest, I'm not sure I do either. And yet they have loaned me their car and have somehow found a way to listen to my stories of non-identifying information, central registries, and now reunion. There's a sharp tap on the window, and I'm broken from my reverie. Bobby pulls back her gloved hand and asks me if I'm okay through the muffled glass. I nod, grafting an awkward smile across my face. Apparently satisfied, Bobby steps under the porch awning. Then she digs for something in her purse, waiting for me. I undo my seatbelt and prepare to open the door, but when I look past her, I see the strangest thing. 2 houses down, a young woman runs down the front steps of a house. She is bundled in a brown jacket that looks much too small for her, and a knitted red hat that looks like a misshapen mushroom. But it's the way she walks that catches my attention. Studied and forceful, like she is determined to get something from the world. Her walk is my own. I don't know how I know it, but I do. I push the door open quickly and stand up, the shock of the cold piercing every cell in my body. Could she be her? The girl on the other side of the wormhole I saw all those years ago? They saw each other in the woods behind the house that Shannon lives in when she was 10. I don't know where this thought comes from, but it appears and stays defiant. The girl is walking quickly toward a rusted old yellow VW Bug parked at the curb. A girl who looks much shorter and Latina sits behind the wheel. When she hears my car door slam, the girl who is me and not me turns. When our eyes meet mine, they widen in surprise, and I know she is thinking the same thing as me. What the fuck is going on? Is that me? Because she has my face, or I have hers, or something. Maybe Patricia had twins. Maybe we were separated at birth, and this girl, my sister, is being raised by family here while I was given up. I rub my eyes because I want to make sure I'm awake, not dreaming. And I hear the girl in the VW shout something in Spanish through the open shotgun seat window. Shannon, Bobby is saying to me. I force myself to focus on the clear, familiar sound of her voice grounding me. Reluctantly, I break my glance with my twin and address Bobby. Her brown eyes are filled with worry. Did you see that? See what? Bobby says. Asks, her face a mask of confusion. Look right there, I say, pointing to the girl who was frozen on the steps only a moment before. But she is not there anymore. I gasp as the rusted VW Bug chugs past us, its windows all rolled up and foggy. It's impossible to see inside. That is an old car, Bobby says. I kind of can't believe it still runs. But I saw her. I know it was her, I say. And before I know what's happening, I'm running out into the street, chasing the car. Hey, stop, I yell. I know it's her. I know it's me. I'm gonna stop there.
Wow. I can't wait for that to come out. I want to hear the rest of it. When it comes out next year?
Fall 2022.
Okay. Yeah. So like a year and a half from now about. Okay. I don't want to wait that long. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for doing this panel. I know that's no small thing. I appreciate that.
Thank you for asking us and creating a space where there's some trust.
Okay, our last reader tonight will be Sheila O'Connor.
I feel like I have very little to add, which I felt, Heidi, when you asked me to be part of the panel, but here I am. So the readings tonight were just incredible, but I feel completely gutted from listening to them because they're just so powerful and filled with so much conflicting emotion and honesty and complexity that resists any kind of single narrative around adoption, which is probably the only thing that I feel like I understand, which is there isn't a single story to tell about adoption. So in my lifetime, I had two cousins who were adopted, and that seemed kind of mysterious to me, and something that really wasn't ever brought up in the family. And that's the sole amount I knew about adoption. And then close to my adulthood, I found out that my mother had been adopted, and my mother had found that out when she was close to 35 years old. So the knowledge that my mom had been adopted began to give me a sense of something that had been wrong in my family, which I had never had the language for as I was growing up. And it led me to eventually, many, many years later, attempt to find out information about the circumstances of her adoption and her birth mother. And that was a closed adoption, and it was a secret adoption. And it was also an adoption in 1935 where there was a lot of shame connected with it. The adoption stories in my family have a lot of shame connected with them. So they weren't anything that was ever discussed in any way. And by not discussing it, we were all saved from the shame of the knowledge that that adoptions had ever occurred. And this was the idea. I say that sarcastically, but that was what the adults, I think, were hoping for, that they would save us from the shame of adoption, essentially. So my mother was born in 1935 to her mother, who was a 15-year-old who was incarcerated for 6 years for being pregnant with my mother, essentially, at the Minnesota Home School for Girls, very conveniently called that because it was not a school and it wasn't a home either. And she had a 6-year sentence for being pregnant with my mother. And when we saw my mother's file, we saw in the file that she had wanted to keep my mother, which was just a seismic shift inside my mother to discover that she had ever been wanted or anyone had wanted to keep her, I guess. And it also was really difficult for me because it seemed easier for me to think that she was a 15-year-old girl who really didn't want my mother and, wasn't going to keep her and went on to live her life. But I didn't know anything about her. So in Evidence of V, I spend a lot of time trying to make sense of what that meant to her to be that girl, the 15-year-old girl incarcerated, having her infant child taken from her, she was then adopted within the family and never being able to say within the family, I'm your mother, and I think the cost of that was very great. And her life ended with she ended up committing suicide. And her children, who have only recently learned this information, feel that this shaped their mother's life as well. Then when my mother was 15, with no knowledge of having been adopted, she had a child. And she was taken to California to give birth to that child. And the child was given to a doctor at the hospital whose wife wanted a baby. So it was done in a private adoption. And my mother, they said, give the baby and never look back, go on and live your life. Don't ever tell anybody it ever happened to you. So of course my mother did. She never told anybody it ever happened, without knowing that that she was actually living something that had already happened to her. So, and I'm just so deeply moved by the thought that her mother watched that and knew it, like everybody knew it because everybody knew the story. Anyway, that of course was another secret. And I found out about my brother when I was in my 20s and in graduate school. But my entire life, I had known I had a brother, even though this had never been said in the family. And so the piece that I'm going to read tonight it's a short piece. It's called For Tom in Pieces. And it's about my brother, Tom, who was placed with the doctors in California. 1. From the first, I occupied your absence. A missing boy's life I stepped into as if it were my own. No one told me you existed, but I knew. 2. Shadow brother alive in California, while a child in Minnesota wondered where you were. 3. Never under beds, although I looked. A girl following a ghost boy. 4. In whatever costume I could find, cowboy boots, baseball cap and jersey, my hair cut to my head, donning the mask of the Lone Ranger or the bravado of Butch Cassidy. What are you, girl or boy? 5. A family of 3 girls, except. 6. Every boy, my missing brother, Pat McCoy, Steve Egan, Terry Sames, another Catholic Pat, Ted and Greg, Larry, Chuck and Mickey, Jimmy, Randy, John, Paul, Pat again, Bobby, Eldon, Marty, Reed. At 6 years old or 16, and even now, I cannot be without a brother. Cannot be. 7. Here is what she says. I have something I should tell you. And there I am, 25, on a visit home to Minneapolis, back in my childhood bedroom. Everything still blue, all blue. Door closed to a shared secret. Mother sitting on my bed, hands nervous in her lap. You had a son, I say. My answer so immediate, it could have been a math fact, nothing more than 2 + 2, that you gave up for adoption. How could you know that, Sheila? She asked, shocked. Her secret so well buried, she'd imagined she'd forgotten it herself. Her own husband. 8. What I wanted to know first, where is he? Boy under the bed. Amsterdam. Tom. His name is Tom. 9. Hello, Tom. This is your sister. I don't know what to write. I understand that you're in Amsterdam, a blues musician, always blue, a band leader, a composer, a performer, stage name Red Archibald, Redhead. I guess you got that from your dad. The most important thing I need to say won't make much sense. I always knew that you were missing. I knew that you were gone. Did you know that I was missing? Did you sense a shadow sister out there somewhere? Please don't wish that you'd been here from the beginning. The early years were shit. I have to hope you had a better life in California with a doctor, Dad. For years, we survived on butter sandwiches with sugar. Our single mother always working or too busy being young. A mother not well suited for the job. Don't believe you would have bonded. I'm afraid she doesn't bond. 10. She was 15 when she gave you to a stranger you efficiently erased. A doctor at a hospital was looking for a baby for his wife. 11. Brother I believed in, brother I waited for, brother that I was, brother that I found in every boy, brother with the blues, brother hooked on heroin, brother home from Amsterdam performing on the streets of San Francisco, brother stoned for our first meeting, another messy drunk in a long line of messy drunks, brother busted, brother sending letters from jail, brother clean, brother making amends, brother who wants to know me now, sister who waited all those years, sister who doesn't answer letters, brother out, brother launching a new band in California, CD arriving in the mail, brother with hepatitis C, brother in need of a new liver, brother off the wagon, on the wagon, off. Brother dead on Christmas Eve. Brother, an obituary I'm asked to write from Minnesota. Missing boy, lost and found and lost forever. Memorial tribute at the Saloon in San Francisco, a blues bar I visit 5 years later, in search of you again. 12. Did you know my brother? Ask the bouncer, owner, bartender, ask the drunks, write the answer on a napkin. Red was a good guy. He was a great guy. He just liked the dope. Save as evidence. 13. Brother gone from my beginning, nothing more than a long imagined half of my split self. No proof now that we were family, both of us efficiently erased. 14. Shadow brother, ghost, brother always gone. Thank you.
Oh my God, Sheila. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Is that from a new manuscript?
No, it's just from a thing, but it was in Friction.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I want to encourage the audience, if you have questions, to submit them either in the chat or in the Q&A. But I wanted to, I guess, offer up a question for whoever wants to answer it, that I'm thinking a lot about craft as much as about content, but in talking about adoption, there are so many stories. You know, everyone has their own adoption story that's different from other adoptees or from other parts of the adoption triad. So what I'm interested in is how often spaces, holes, absences, what's missing, what's ruptured, appears in so many of our works. Because I'm thinking, like, even in mine, where you would think open adoption, where everything is known, like the birth mother goes missing for years at a time. And thinking about that, how do you try to represent or write absence, holes, the unknown, what's missing in your work? And this question's for anybody.
I'll say something quick. God. It's like I'm having an emergency, like feelings. I except for Shannon, birth fathers were not brought up in that I remember in Heidi, yours, or Sheila's piece today, even though in Evidence of V, it's very much present. And so in a lot of I use a lot of myths and fairy tales, and I tend to have a lot of father figures in them. And I have a number of reasons for that, but I think that part of it's because in fairy tales, mothers are always dead. And then for me, part of it too, I think, is how my family, my children came about. And like the missing father in so much of adoption discourse, it feels so heavy to me and big, looming, because patriarchy is so much of the reason why adoption exists, for various reasons. The various pressures that happen to women, girls and women. But fathers are generally, often just not in the story. not in the discourse. Yeah, I would love to talk about it more, but I'll just stop there. Because for me, there's so many absences because it's a whole, you know, I'm spending my whole life trying to fill the, you know, fill those in. Yeah.
I think that's a really key point, and also just in terms of, you know, who is telling the stories around adoption, right? I mean, it's like, yeah, we're all in different points in the triad, come from you know, different racial, cultural, ethnic backgrounds, but we're all women too, and so I feel like there's a way in which patriarchy also kind of over determines that too, you know, where a lot of men aren't socialized to, you know, I just think a lot of men don't feel like they have this skill set to, you know, or that they're given the skill set, or that they want to develop it. Maui. Sorry, I have a dog and a 6-year-old on the bed behind me. That's pretty much a metaphor for my entire life. You know, to delve into some of this, you know, emotional stuff. Like, I know, you know, for adoptees, like, yeah, we have higher rates of mental illness. We have higher rates of, you know, suicide, but like that also breaks down in terms of gender too. You know, male adoptees have much higher rates than female adoptees, and I think that also has something to do with it. I mean, and it's interesting that you say that, that's why, because, you know, in Botched, it's like my birth father, I didn't expect this to happen, but it really is in the end kind of a narrative of reclamation, and like a lot of mixed folks from my generation, it's like the birth, or the, you know, I have a lot of friends who aren't adoptees who are mixed, and their dad is Black and was not in the picture for a lot of different reasons, but really, frankly, a lot of the same reasons that, you know, adoptees, Black fathers aren't in the picture. And so that's interesting. But also in terms of, you know, what is lost through adoption, in transracial adoption, of course, much of what's lost is folks' home culture, you know, and so it is about the father, right, in that context, but it's also about, you know, this connection in my case to Blackness as well, and Black culture. And I mean, I think for me, what was really interesting and kind of surprising for Botched, to sort of watch it come out like that, is that so many of these ruptures were being expressed through these sort of modes of speculative fiction and sci-fi, you know, so wormholes, multiple timelines, all this stuff that I really enjoy watching, you know, huge fan of so much visual sci-fi, but I don't really read it that much. And so it was just interesting to see that kind of come out in these hybrid forms, but also in a lot of ways, you know, makes sense, because I do believe that adoptees are constantly, you know, living multiple timelines, and sort of how we make sense of things is, yeah, through these modes and frameworks that other people might find to be, you know, precious and fictive. But for us, it's like, well, why is that any less true than the state saying that, you know, I'm your daughter?
Sheila, did you want to answer, or?
I've lost track of the question.
I was asking about like how do you,
about the fathers. I'm so far moved on to this question about the fathers, but what was the question exactly?
the original question was writing about like representing spaces, holes, the unknown,
Yeah.
and fathers. Sun Young had brought up.
Yeah, I guess that in some ways, I think I've only written about absence since I ever started writing. I mean, when Sun Young said that, I thought, yeah, that's true. Me too. That's every single book is about that. But when it comes to writing the literal truth around the absence in my family and all of the gaps, I don't ever feel like I have any choice but to have space. I can't find any solid cohesive narrative because I don't have any solid cohesive narrative, period. So I'm the best I can do is maybe try to put some words together and then some other words together in an effort to say something to myself, kind of. But it always defies like a good tidy novel. I'd like to do a good tidy novel, but I'm not ever able to do it about it because it's just so, like, there's just too many missing things. So I guess that I find that there's always a lot of white space in my work around this.
That is so interesting. I love that you said that at the end, a good tidy novel. Why and I were both cracking up. It's like, because if you read, all of our work is so different. I've read everybody's work here, but it's like there is this through line that you could argue, I think, of whatever you want to say, right? I guess Miles Davis would call it like the space between the notes, Sadia Hartman would call it the ruptures. That stop it now. That is, yeah, when you can't, there's just nothing there. Right? Like it's like there's something and then there's nothing and then there's something and then there's not, and then this goes here and then you have to revise this whole other thing that you thought you knew because it's this whole thing, and so that changes what came before and then what comes, and it's like, if that's sort of your experience, then how is that not going to affect the way that you write?
Yeah, I definitely feel that too in trying to write like the nice tidy narrative, that it didn't work as a memoir, that it was a memoir and linked essays because there were all these weird viewpoints, and every time I thought I could pin something down, other things would shift in my own thinking. And as I learned more about adoption, or as I grappled more with like, what does family mean, when the definition of family kept changing and shifting and expanding in some wonderful ways and some terrifying ways. Yeah, the good tidy novel. Yeah, that seems to elude all of us. Shannon, building off of something that you had said earlier too, the kind of the opposite of writing about spaces and holes is something I noticed in all of our work is this move towards the hybrid, which almost seems like a collision of things, as opposed to like having white space and rupture and stuff, that bringing together collisions of genres or moving between genres in your topics. Does anyone have a sense of that, of like why hybrid work or moving across multiple genres seems to be attractive for this kind of material?
I mean, I think you have to go with what you have, and I mean, it's just sort of like, if what you have is like a certain amount of letters, you know, from your birth mom, and what you have is, you know, some pictures, and some what we would regard as deeply problematic documents and pieces of advice from your adoption agency, and some things that your birth mom told you, and some things that you observed. You know, and my book is also, I mean, it's also a question of sort of like, okay, yeah, what do you do when you don't have these pieces, right? And this process of like, but it's also about this process of like reinventing, constantly going back, and revising your narratives, right? And that's part of the reason why I include, you know, the poem from when I'm 22, right? And then it goes into like a scene, because it's also about my own consciousness, sort of sifting through this information, and you know, how to make some kind of narrative. If it's not cohesive, then, you know, that's part of the story. But I mean, I just think that, like, yeah, writers and artists, it's like you work with what you have, and if what you have is pieces and they're in different forms, then that's what you use.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot for a long time. And, you know, one thing I can say is that I'm working with language as text, as fiction, like my American identity as a fiction. The birth certificate is a fiction. Like, no, that's not actually the story of my birth. So, you know, feels like my existence is a Frankenstein, like stitch of a bunch of corpses, you know, reanimated. And so as a writer, I'm constantly trying to take these texts that have so much power, but are fictional, but are official. And I'm trying to make, just as an ethics, trying to show those seams and be transparent. And I'd much rather just bring in the whole text and let people judge for themselves how controlling they are. To describe them, I couldn't do them justice. You know, in and of themselves, all of these texts are so interesting. You know, I think it's, for me, I also think it may be because I was a reader. Like, I didn't know that I didn't see anyone like me in any books, movies, pictures, you know, anything in this country. I experienced social death my whole life, basically, and basically still do. So I'm trying to make all of the infrastructure of the condition of my existence as a state subject visible, you know, to myself first and foremost. Like, what the fuck is all this? What am I? What am I supposed? You know, what am I? In Raoul Peck's new documentary, which everyone has to see, you know, in the midpoint, he goes through a collage of like what he and his brothers have accomplished and what they do and where they've been all over the world, and how he's, you know, been in film festivals and you know, but he starts this refrain of like, who am I? You know, I've been at Cannes, I've been to here, I've taught people here, I speak this, I speak that. Who am I if basically all of my accomplishments are in the colonial world? You know, so it's just also like a post-colonial question of who's the post-colonial subject when they're in the empire, you know, and when all of my education is imperial, my language is imperial, my, you know, my descendants are going to be part of. So for me, it's like, I need all of this architecture of all the things that are so over determining my existence and would completely annihilate me if I didn't constantly try to push them out a little bit. Yeah. Thanks for that question.
I think someone had raised a hand. Did you have a question either in the, put it in the chat or in the Q&A? Yeah, we can only turn on the audio. If you, okay. Sheila, did you want to answer the question about hybridity, like mixing forms in your work and how you approach writing about this topic? You're still muted.
Evidence of V was a hybrid book because I had documents and they seemed untrue to me. And then I was left to try to tell some kind of a truth, which I attempted to do through fiction. And then I have, closer to what would be prose poems, and then some things that are just flat out poems in there. And I guess that I have so often relied on fiction to find some kind of truth that I don't think anyone's ever going to tell me, or I'm never going to be able to tell or find a factual truth because of so much being missing. So I tend to move between whatever pieces of something I have and then into what I could imagine to try to make sense of something, even when I know that I'm only imagining. But it's exactly what I have done as a human in my life, is try to imagine a story because I can't make sense of things. So that feels natural to me, to move between different modes of constructing a narrative or language or something, and just being up against the failures of language, the failures of imagination, the failures of documentation, and the failures of history. Throw all the failures together.
Yeah, all the failures is like another form of rupture too. Are there any questions that you have for each other that I haven't covered, or anything that you feel like needs to be said that hasn't been said yet? Okay. Well, I am so grateful to all of you for being here tonight and for being so generous with your time and your work and your answers. and this discussion has just been a blessing, and I bow down to all of you. Thank you. And I guess that is our event for the evening. Thank you to the audience for being here and for sharing this.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
I guess a round of applause to everybody.
Yay.
So glad to get to hear your work and get to hear all of your thoughts on this. Thank you again. And this will be available as a recording too, so we will post this later for people to share. Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, Kris and Normandale for hosting, and the Minnesota State Arts Board for funding the speakers to be here, and love to all of you.
Heidi, thank you for even having the idea to put it together. I mean, it was just such a privilege to be a part of the conversation and to be here witnessing this work. So thank you. Thank you, Kris, for hosting us.
Thank you all for coming.
Everyone.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Shannon and Sun Young and Heidi, I loved you. Good night.
Thank
Night.
you. Good night.